Welcome to the Central Seminary podcast. Thanks for joining us today as we discuss biblical and theological issues relating to life and ministry. This podcast is a ministry of Central Baptist Theological Seminary in Plymouth, Minnesota. To learn more about Central Seminary, visit our website at www.centralseminary.edu. My name is Jared, and I'll be your host. Well, welcome to the Central Seminary podcast. Today we're talking about the Christian virtue of hospitality. And I have with us today Dr. John Pratt, who's one of our professors here at Central. And the whole idea for this actually came about, Dr. Pratt, from a sermon you preached on the topic of hospitality.
Yes, I've had a privilege of sharing this sermon first at our church about a year and a half ago, and thought it would be a good thing for us to consider, especially for our men in ministry and leading their churches and their families in being hospitable.
All right. And so we talked about the topic, and I said, do you know of anyone that we could bring in to the discussion who might be able to contribute on the topic of hospitality? And I thought in my head it would be great if we could have a woman who is really experienced at this. And you mentioned Pam. So we have Pam Deckert with us, and you and your husband live in the cities here. You're friends of the seminary. You have, is it four kids?
Yes, we have 4 adult children. 3 of them are married. The last one will be married in August.
Okay, great. So let's get into the discussion. One thing I do like to start off with is, and maybe Dr. Pratt, you may do more reading because of your job here, but do either of you want to share with us any books that you're reading now, or any books you hope to read, or any book on the topic of hospitality that you would recommend?
Well, I think I'll just say a few books I've been reading. I think Pam has a good stack of books over there that'll be good for her to talk about as far as hospitality is concerned. I'm just reading right now. I'm in the middle of a book called Providence by John Piper. It's a really thick tome, so I'm working through that.
I have that one.
And actually, I got a couple of biographies, one on R.C. Sproul and one on John R. Rice, that I'm really looking forward to jumping into. But I feel obligated to finish the Providence book first. But anyway, they're down the road for me. Looking forward to reading those. So, anyway, I'm interested in hearing what Pam's been reading, and certainly those hospitality books over there.
Yes. Well, I was going to mention 2 books. I read The Gospel Comes with a House Key by Rosaria Butterfield, and our women's Bible study went through that a couple summers ago, which was very helpful. And I think pulling all of us out of our comfort zone on what it means to be hospitable, not only just to the family of God, but to our neighbors and those who are not part of the family. And then a book I read very recently was A Place to Belong by Megan Hill, which is, the subtitle is Learning to Love the Local Church. And that was very specifically to really seeing your church family as your family, and what that means to be a part of that family, and loving that family, and showing hospitality in that family. So I would highly recommend both books.
Great. Sounds like some excellent resources. With that in mind, why don't we talk about hospitality? And Dr. Pratt, maybe you want to start us off with the call to hospitality in the scriptures. I don't know if you're going to share some verses or just talk about it.
Yeah, it actually comes up, especially in Paul's writings and in Hebrews. I think those are probably the 2 main places. Also, Peter talks about it a bit, but Paul speaks to it in Romans 12 about contributing to the needs of the saints and showing hospitality. Certainly one of the requirements for elder is that they would be hospitable. And even the widows that are spoken of in 1 Timothy 5 are chosen because they have been hospitable, and that's been something that characterized them as being women that should be respected in the church. Likewise, in Hebrews, we're told not to neglect hospitality. There in Hebrews 13, as we might have entertained angels unawares. And likewise, later on in the chapter, Hebrews 13, about not neglecting to do good and to sharing what we have, because such sacrifices are pleasing to God. And then the text that I probably spend most of the time on in the sermon itself was in 1 Peter 4, where Peter reminds us that we are to show hospitality to one another without grumbling, as a way of demonstrating love for one another in the body. There's a couple of other places in the Johannine epistles where there were missionaries that would be coming through, and John encourages those, especially in 3 John, who have been involved in being hospitable to these traveling missionaries and taking them into their homes, and commends that sort of behavior. And certainly we see this with Paul many times being helped by others along the way. We have the story of Cornelius and Peter, and Cornelius inviting Peter into his home, which was a rather strange thing for Jewish Paul to be going into a Gentile home, but that certainly was the doorstep to gospel getting into, not only to Cornelius's home, but to the Gentiles generally. So there's a lot of these stories throughout the scriptures of hospitality, but these exhortations in the epistles of the New Testament are especially appropriate, I think.
One of the things that came to my mind, Dr. Pratt, as you're preaching your sermon, you're talking about entertaining in the Bible, and I was thinking just what we know of the culture, and, someone shows up on your door, you give them a place to stay, that sort of thing. There's some cultural differences from today to what we see back in the Bible times. Could it be easy for someone to say, well, that was something that was for their culture? That was something back in Bible times. They didn't have hotels. They didn't have fast food restaurants. You kind of had to, for safety reasons, you kind of had to put somebody up because there was dangerous animals and robbers and cold at night and all those things. What would you say to someone who says, well, that's not really applicable for us today?
Well, I think Pam could speak to this, because she and Greg have entertained many people in their home, even though they're not necessarily. Well, why don't you give us a few examples along the way?
Sure. I think the biblical command is to be hospitable, not just during Bible times, but to us today. And so Greg and I have always seen our home as a gift from the Lord and something to be shared with others. And so we've had the opportunity to have student teachers stay with us, missionaries. We've had foreign exchange students, whether for short-term Chinese students or for a whole year. And those weren't always easy times, but through it all, God taught our whole family, even our kids when they were young, important lessons about sharing with others, about showing love even when it's inconvenient to do so, and sharing their home, sharing their food. All of those things, I think, are just valuable lessons. And as we're given, we give back. And I think that's just an important principle for all believers to follow.
And can I add to that, as I've been a recipient of Greg and Pam's hospitality personally, and our seminary has, and our church has. I'm speaking here particularly, Greg and Pam own a lake home over in Wisconsin that they call their cabin, and they open that place up for friends and family, all kinds of people to come in, and they just make it so warm and inviting of a place, and they open it up freely. And it's just such a, like she said, God has blessed them with home and a place that they can share with others, and they do. They don't hoard it. They don't just keep it to themselves, but they open it up and allow others to use it. I mean, how many people are willing to say, yeah, go ahead and use our boat, our motor, as you will. I know that they've had a few accidents along the way, that people they'll gladly share their things with others who come. And that's always been a great example, I think, to all of us about how you can use what God has blessed you with to bless others.
Yeah, and I think we're going to get into it a little bit later from 1 Peter 4, but the emphasis on Christian love, and I'm thinking in my mind of Acts chapter 2, where they were selling things to give to others, and almost a communal aspect of our stuff. And we can use it for other people. So that's so great to see that in action. So based on some of that stuff, how should we define hospitality? I've heard several different definitions, some very broad, just a friend to strangers is kind of a common one. Would you, either of you like to share maybe your definition or a definition that you've read?
Yes, I would say hospitality is the happy overflow of a forgiven heart. And I think out of that comes, as I said, as we've been forgiven much and as we were welcomed into God's family, not based on anything we did or what we look like or our social status, we need to welcome others. And whether that's into our home, into our church, or just into our lives, I think it should just be that natural outflow of our focus on gratefulness.
I love that because you're connecting it directly to the gospel. And this is kind of the outflow of what's happened to us.
And adding to that, the idea of I'm seeking to bless somebody else. And I can do that by demonstrating acceptance of them, compassionate listening, offering encouraging words. It might include provision of food or drink or shelter. I mean, these are probably the things that we tend to think of most as practical ways that we can be hospitable. But in all of those things, I'm seeking to, as you said, Pam, the outflow of love, to bless somebody. I want them to be able to feel like they can love God more and glorify Him more because they've spent time with me, and I'm trying to bless them in that.
It's so helpful to visualize that, and not just I'm doing something for them, but I'm trying to bless them with the ministry of the gospel that's ministered to me.
That's right.
And that leads into 1 Peter 4, 7 through 11. Where does hospitality come from? Do you want to speak on that a little bit?
Yes, I mean, as we can see in the command, I just like to read the passage so we have a little bit of the context of what Peter is saying there as a way of laying the groundwork here for this conversation. But in 1 Peter 4, verse 7, Peter says, "The end of all things is at hand. Therefore be self-controlled and sober-minded for the sake of your prayers. Above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers a multitude of sins. Show hospitality to one another without grumbling. As each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied grace." So we see there that the outflow of love for one another is shown in hospitality to each other. And likewise, as he continues in the passage, he talks about using gifts. Each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's very grace. Whoever speaks is one who speaks miracles of God. Whoever serves is one who serves by the strength that God supplies, in order that in everything God may be glorified through Jesus Christ. So the sharing of love for one another is shown particularly here in the passage by being hospitable to each other and by using gifts to serve one another in the body of Christ. And I like the context there as well. This isn't just on an individual level, which we've been talking here about most especially at this point, but it's also a church ministry that we have to one another in our local churches.
I agree with that.
I like that text, how it almost, we don't maybe think of it this way, as hospitality almost as a subset category of love. Keep on loving each other, high showing hospitality. And many times we get so busy, we neglect that. So we touched on this briefly, but maybe you can give us some practical ideas. What might hospitality look like in the home and in the church? Many times we link it to the home, but how can we be hospitable in other ways?
Well, I can mention a couple of things in the church setting. I think we sometimes consign greeting to the official greeters of the church. And that is a very important ministry, to greet new people that are coming in. They're looking, where do I go? What do I do? So greeters, having an official greeting group in your church is a great idea. to encourage new people, but it shouldn't just be the greeters that are greeting people. And I think we should individually, as members in a church, be arriving early and staying late, and trying to invite anybody that we see that looks like a new face to encourage, give them a nice handshake and a warm smile, and start a conversation with them. Let them know that you care, that that they visited you in your church and you're glad that they're there. Ask them questions. Are you new to the area? Where do you live? What did you appreciate about the service today, if we're talking at the end of the service? Do you have any questions that I could answer for you about our church? Or do you have any needs, ways that we can pray for you? So hospitality is trying to lend not only a helping hand, but showing that person that is coming in that we care about them. And, let's face it, we tend to talk to our friends, people that we know well. And I think we need to take a look around us in our church setting and, is there a new face? Is there someone I don't know? And I want to reach out and greet them, and it's not just the greeter's job. It's all of our job to try to reach out and to extend a warm greeting, or, like I said, engage somebody in conversation that we don't know very well.
Yeah, and to add on that, Elizabeth George, in one of her books, she shares an example about how she and her two daughters would often find themselves going to the same people at church, their friends. And when we were new in a church, I would find that we were doing the same things. And so Elizabeth, in her book, she shares how we should go looking for sheep. So I would challenge our daughters, okay, today, look for a sheep. Look for a young woman your age or younger, older, who is by herself, who looks like she's new maybe, and go to her. Ask her a question, ask her her name. And then after church on the way home, we would ask, so who did you meet today? And it was a challenge to me too, because I would tend to gravitate to the people I already knew. And when you have those antenna up and you're looking for those people, going to them, it can be intimidating to do that, but what a blessing to them that someone has reached out to them. And then the other thing to add to that is just to remember their names. And we had a gentleman in our church who used to carry a little notebook with him. And when he would learn somebody's names, he would write them down. And I started doing that because it's very helpful. I'll forget a name, and it's just so helpful then to remember somebody's name. That makes them feel very welcomed.
And I think Pam has touched on a great talk about building a culture of hospitality in your church. It starts in your home. And if you're encouraging your children, as Pam has mentioned, and my wife used to do that as well with our kids, find somebody that you don't know and start a conversation with them today. And that's going to spread throughout the church. Then if we're teaching our children to do that, it likewise encourages us as the parents to be doing that. And it doesn't have to be someone new. It could be that widow that's been sitting in that same spot every week, all the time. My children even know who she is. They had a conversation with her. Reach out and talk to somebody that you haven't had a conversation with before. It's just a good reminder to all of the people in the body, but I think it starts in the home that way.
I think what I'm hearing is intentionality. You have to be intentional. I remember as in my life, that was growing me in the idea of reaching out to people. I would have to be very intentional, much to my shame. I wasn't spiritual enough on Sunday morning to walk up to people and try to share something. And so I would start on a Saturday night, and I would think of a verse that I could share with somebody just to create some meaningful community around the Word of God at our church. And I would think, who are two people that if they're there tomorrow, I could go up and I could say, hey, I've been reading this in the Bible and I just wanted to share with you. And it took some time, and that was a little awkward and uncomfortable, but eventually it became kind of second nature. And I sat back and realized this is really what church community is about. This is what hospitality is about. And sometimes you have to get yourself out of that comfort zone. You have to be intentional so that you are looking at people. I think of the Gospels and how they describe Christ, looking at the multitudes. And sometimes we're so busy with church life and church ministries that we don't take the time to look. And that's so important that you see people.
For sure.
What are some misconceptions that we might have about hospitality? How might we get it wrong or misunderstand how the Bible describes it?
Well, I touched on a few of these things in the. Well, certainly, Pam, why don't you go ahead and I'll.
Yeah, I think it is not entertaining. And I think when people hear the word, they think it means I have to invite a big family over to my home and present a big dinner that's on time, everything's perfect, my best china is laid out. And that's not at all what it is. It's not entertaining at all. That focuses on yourself, whereas hospitality is focusing on the other person.
Indeed. And that, I think, gets to the point, too, where someone might say, well, I only have this little apartment. I mean, how in the world can I have a group over? Well, you don't have to have a group over to be hospitable. You can have one person over. You can have two people over. And you can have you're trying to have a warm conversation. You don't have to spend hours and hours making a wonderful meal. Like Pam said, entertainment is about you and how you're presenting things. It's not about the others. Whereas if I'm oriented toward others, I recently experienced a situation where I was invited in to speak at a church, and I stayed at the pastor's home, and with his 4 children, and they just opened up their home to me. They said, "Here's where the cereal is in the morning," and it was were all the toys put away? No, they weren't. It was a lived-in home, just like you expect a home with 4 young children to look, and I was comfortable there, and that's hospitality, where you feel comfortable and you feel blessed because you are with the family, rather than, they had to have all the finest linens and have to have the finest meal laid out for me every time we have a meal together. No, it wasn't that at all. It was a normal family life. But they invited me in to their lives. And that's what hospitality can look like, whether you have a bigger home or just a little one. You can still invite people in.
Yeah, for sure. And we see Christ doing inviting people, and he was good at inviting people that everyone would consider outsiders, and we them on the inside. What a good example.
I think it's maybe good here at this point too to say there are going to be times where we try and it doesn't go so well. We had a couple visit our church 2 Sundays in a row, and so we thought, it's a young family. They had one little child, and we thought, hey, we'll add them to our celebration after Easter Sunday. So we invited them over to our home and had them involved with our whole family during on Easter Sunday, and we never saw them again at our church, and we weren't able to have an ongoing relationship with them. But, it was still a valuable opportunity to get to know them. And I think they felt blessed and encouraged by being with us, even if they didn't stay at our church as a result of our effort.
Yeah. I would also add, too, that it doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing everything. I think an important key to remember is to accept and welcome offers of help. So whenever we have somebody over and they say, "What can I bring?" I always accept that and give them something to bring, because then it's not all about what I'm providing to them. It's what we're all doing together. And that's something that I grew in as a young mom, because I thought it meant I needed to do everything. And I've grown in understanding that it's wonderful to be in the kitchen together and be working together and finish the meal together. And sometimes things don't go so well and something gets burned. And everybody's gracious. And it's seeing that Mary, Martha, balance and understanding that we need to be humble and it's not about us. And it's just really showing Christ and his love to people.
It's interesting, Pam, you brought up the Mary Martha story. I realize that the account is not in the scriptures to teach us about hospitality. But I think we learned something well there, that Martha did, she did well to want to invite Jesus into her home. She did well to want to provide a nice meal for him and everything. Then she blew it, I guess you could say, because she wanted Mary to have the same orientation toward serving like she had, and Mary didn't. And yet Jesus was blessed Mary more than Martha in that particular story, because Mary was aware of what was most important, which in that case was listening to Jesus, and in that sense, blessing her guest by hearing. I mean, what better way to be blessed and to bless guest than having the Son of God sitting in your home? Obviously, that's not going to be a situation that we're going to be having exactly, but there was a willingness on Mary's part to realize what was most important, and that was taking care of the guest that was there with them.
One idea I'd like to talk about is hospitality in relation to spiritual gifts. Is it a spiritual gift? And can we excuse ourselves from hospitality by saying, I don't have that gift? And the reason I ask that question is because I've experienced that, heard that before, even in my mind, from someone who was in ministry and was shepherding a church and did not excel at hospitality. And that was the reason, or maybe we could say excuse, that was used. Why don't I have the spiritual gift of hospitality? Can you address that for us?
Well, Paul told the elders, Paul made one of the requirements of an elder that they were hospitable. And that's not a spiritual gift. If you look at all of those character traits, they're not spiritual gifts per se, other than perhaps the ability to teach. And all of the other qualities that are mentioned there for elder are character traits that every Christian should have, and that the pastor should be leading the way in. And hospitality is one of those. And I realize people can say, no, I'm an introvert, or I'm shy, or I don't really do well around people. That's not a requirement for being hospitable and seeking to bless somebody else. I think if we look at hospitality as the outflow of love, like we've said, and blessing somebody else, it will take away this tendency that we have to be introverted, or to think, what will they think about me? Or I just don't know what I'm going to say. Or thinking of all of these excuses for why we're not reaching out to somebody else. It's not a spiritual gift, I don't think. But maybe, Pam, we have another perspective on that.
No, I agree. I don't think it's a spiritual gift. I think just as some people are better teachers and are gifted to teach, some people are more gifted naturally to be hospitable, to be outgoing, but that doesn't excuse you if you're not. I think it's a command for all believers.
So how would you create that culture in the church? Because that's really what we want, right? We want to be a church that welcomes people, that's a friend to strangers. How do you create that culture where it's not just one or two people, but our church just lives there?
Well, I can speak to the church where we attend, where Pam and I are both members at. We Redeemer Bible Church is the name of our church. We were not there, and Pam and Greg were there longer than we were. And when we started coming to the church, it was really, I would say, part of the culture already of the church, where people were glad. They invited us in, they greeted us. We felt really welcomed, even though the only couple that we really knew well were Greg and Pam already, because we had known each other before. So there was that culture there already. I don't know, Pam, why do you think it was there?
Well, I think it can be part of that mentoring relationship. There are a lot of disciple opportunities at our church. And I think if a church has that happening, where the older women are teaching the younger, whether that's in a group Bible study or one-on-one. The same with the men. That can be an example. They lead by example. And then, as John said, in our families, if families are encouraged, parents are encouraged to develop that in their children, the children are going to pick up on that, and they will naturally become hospitable and will reach out to people, which is a neat thing to see. And then as that just continues to spread, and that's what in this book, A Place to Belong, she talks about that, how you just start. You start yourself, and then pretty soon it just spreads, and people will pick up on that culture.
I think if you have a community group or small group ministry in your church, that's going to lend itself to hospitality, as well as groups meet in homes. And homes are, the owners of those homes are hosting that group and learning how to share what they have with others, and how to encourage everybody in the group to share with one another in those groups. So that's another way of developing a culture in a church as well.
We've also had fellowship groups where we have people sign up to be hosts, and then people sign up to come. And then you'll have maybe 3 or 4, 2 or 3, 4 couples, families, singles come to your house. And again, it's not, you don't make everything, everybody brings something, and you just gather together just for the purpose of getting to know each other better. And so you may not know any of those people who end up being put in your group, but it's just a wonderful way to get to know people who are not maybe of your age group or that you would normally invite over. And that gave our church a good opportunity to practice that.
And again, I think it also starts with those in leadership leading the way as well, and showing this is what hospitality looks like. And we're going to invite people in our homes. We're going to be kind and gracious to all who are coming to the church and greeting them. And it's going to show itself there and amongst the leaders of the church, and it's going to filter down as well.
Yes, great. Well, the irony of hospitality is that it's a warm, friendly thing, inviting people into your life or your home. Sometimes we really have to work at it. We do have to be intentional, and that might seem difficult or might feel awkward. What are some next steps you can recommend for someone who maybe is listening to this and says, I need to do that. I need to get better, but I don't know how?
Yeah, I think there might be a lot of people who initially, when they hear this, they might feel the excuses coming up. Well, but I, and I would say to start by just praying and asking God to show you, is this something that I've been holding back, that I have been resisting obeying, walking in obedience to follow this? And if so, God, help me to rely on your strength, because he doesn't ask us to do something that he won't give us the strength and the ability to do. And so then to just pray and ask God, help me to have that strength. Open my eyes to opportunities. And like you said, on Saturday night, even pray, tomorrow morning, Lord, show me someone. Open my eyes, show me someone who needs an encouragement, who needs a smile. And then give me the courage to just go to that person and welcome them. And I love seeing in our church, sometimes you'll see a man talking with a man, woman talking with a woman, and then you'll see them praying together. And that has developed over time too, that you hear a need and you just say, can I pray for you right now? And that's such a blessing. And that again is something that as you're sensitive to the Holy Spirit and growing in that love and awareness, that God will give you those opportunities. And then I think that can develop then into, okay, now I'm ready to have somebody over for coffee or over for a meal.
Or to continue with that idea, I don't have to have somebody in my home to be hospitable to them either. We can get together for a lunch or coffee or so away from, so that when I'm looking at those times when I'm with somebody else, how can I bless them? That's having a hospitable attitude in spirit towards them, and trying to make those connections. We tend to think of, we put maybe these compartments. This is discipleship opportunity. This is mentoring opportunity. And well, anytime you're talking about discipleship and mentoring, you're talking about hospitality. You're talking about trying to bless somebody and encourage them in the Lord. And that can happen in many different places. It does happen very well in homes. And I think we can develop that culture in our church by encouraging one another to get together and to bless one another.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note, start where you're at. Maybe you're just getting into this, and maybe you can't host 20 people. Or maybe, like you said, Dr. Pratt, you have a small apartment. Well, maybe you could do a picnic in a park. Or, like you said, start off with coffee. I think the emphasis is, who can I invest in the way that God has invested in me with the gospel, and who can I bless by welcoming them into my life, praying with them. All those things are great ideas. Well, that's been a great discussion on hospitality. One question I like to end with on our podcast is just to ask, are there any works of God that you want to share from either your life personally, your family's life, or even just someone that you know at church, someone like that you want to praise God for?
Well, I'll start first, I guess, because just 2 days ago, my son was married. Mm-hmm. And it's just a great work of grace in my son's life, and leading him to the woman that he's married to now. And it's just a blessing. And to see all of our friends and family who were able to be at the wedding, this is a great blessing. Friends from Minnesota, like Greg and Pam, came down for the wedding down in Dallas, and just really God's smile upon us. And these are wonderful times as parents, when we see our children choosing Christian spouses, and it's just a blessing for us.
I would like to share. I'm a Titus 2 leader and have a co-leader, and then we have 5 younger women in our group. And one of them is a physician's assistant at a very busy hospital. And about a month ago, she was really struggling because it was, very busy. It's been a tough couple of years for people in the medical community. And they have 3 little boys. And she was just feeling overwhelmed and, shared through tears that she's just really struggling. And after that night, I got a text from one of the young moms that said, what about at our next meeting if we all come with a meal frozen that she can take home and she can have in her freezer and take out and use? And they did that, but not only just one meal, they brought multiple meals, which was such a blessing. And she was so overwhelmed, obviously there were tears again, but I thought, this is what it's all about. I mean, these are young moms or young women. One of them doesn't have any children, but they sensed a need, saw a need, and said, I can do this. And it was just such an encouragement to me to see them helping her.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. Thanks for your time today. Really appreciate having you on our podcast, and the discussion was great, and we'll look forward to doing it again sometime. Thanks for listening to the Central Seminary podcast. Our mission at Central Seminary is to assist New Testament churches in equipping spiritual leaders for Christ-exalting biblical ministry. Since its founding in 1956, Central Seminary has sought to provide serious students of God's Word with robust theological education as they prepare for ministry. We have many graduates around the world who are serving in countless ways to spread the gospel and proclaim the name of Jesus Christ. Find out more at our website, centralseminary.edu.